All right, everybody, welcome to the Eight Figure Product CEO. I'm here with Elliot Benitez. We're going to talk about Nuni Toaster. What's going to be great about this one is how Elliot is sourcing this product here in America. Okay, so this podcast, and we'll do this as a LinkedIn Live. It's going to be solely focused on how you can, as the entrepreneur, source your product here in the States. A lot of us are used to the Chinese model, which is really easy. You just call up a factory and they do the whole thing for you, and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but you get your finished product. And here in the States, it is a little bit more complicated, but this is an important subject given all of the trade challenges that we're having now. Okay, so we're going to go through that, and we'll do this in 20, 25 minutes. So I'm going to try to streamline this. If you're looking literally for a roadmap of how to source, you got a product idea, you want to bring it to life, you want to do it in the US, that's what we're going to do. Before I go on, Elliot, you want to give a quick intro about yourself and Nuni Toaster?
Absolutely. So my name is Elliot Benitez. I'm the CEO of Nuni Toaster. We design and manufacture tortilla toasters for Hispanic families, taco lovers, Mexican restaurants, schools, universities, hotels, and food trucks. Our patented product line can toast up to 6 hot tortillas in 60 seconds, making taco night a breeze for you and your family. We successfully completed 3 production runs in 2016, 2017, and 2022. We're about a 1 year into reshoring our operations from China to Illinois, and we're excited about the future.
Awesome. So this is a toaster that instead of toasting bread, it's going to toast your tortillas, right? So, and it's a really good looking product, by the way. Yeah, beautiful design, and it's complex. You know, if you've just sourced in China, you think this is easy, but there's all kinds of components. It's an electric, obviously. This is actually an appliance. So there's a ton of complexity and moving parts. And Elliot has had to source all of those. So we're going to go through these steps. Now, before we go through them one by one, I just want to give the listeners and viewers here an idea of what we're going to talk about. So first, I'm going to run through the 8 steps we're going to go through. All right. So we're going to talk about how to validate your product opportunity. If you've already done that, you know, well, then you don't have to do this step. We'll talk about design and engineer. Okay. You validated. Now you got to go to an engineer. You got to get a CAD. You got to get all the components designed and prototyped. And then the next step is typically working with your patent office or your patent attorney, actually, to file any patents that you can. And obviously, this is where you want to protect your product. And then Elliot is going to share his wisdom on some really important areas around government and state resources. Okay, there's a lot of government and state resources, and that's why I kind of wanted to go through this list so that you guys know what's coming. And you know, see how these partnerships can help launch your product, and even how you can get some cash from government and state. Then he's going to talk about supplier outreach. Then we'll go through due diligence with your suppliers, plan for final assembly. So again, this is the US, not China. So you actually now have to go find someone to assemble this. You have to find your contract manufacturers, you have to find your suppliers, your parts, and then get it assembled. So it is daunting, honestly, because I'm doing the same thing. I was talking to Elliot about this with the product that I'm putting together, and I do want to bring it to life here in the States. And even just the assembly part actually can be the hardest, actually, right? You got to find assembly, you got to find packaging, and then finally align your sales forecast with the production capacity. All right, so Elliot, we're going to go through all these, try to hit them all in 20 minutes. Start with your product validation. Now, with Nuni, you had already launched it, okay? So you already sold a bunch of these units. You knew you kind of had a hot idea here, and you also had this thing protected.
That's right. So I'd have to take you back to 2006. I was home catching up with my mom over a home cooked meal, and I realized that there's a pain point during our mealtime, and that was her leaving the table to one more tortillas just so we could finish our meal, right? So naturally, what I did was I jumped on Google and I searched for a tortilla toaster, and nothing appeared. So I went to Amazon and nothing appeared, and I thought to myself, there was kind of a odd problem that no one had figured out how to do a tortilla toaster, right? So, I got back from college, in 2008, and I had this seed planted in my head, and I thought to myself, you know what? I think I should actually get after it. So what I did was I hired a boutique engineering firm that's local. We vetted 2 product development firms just to kind of see compare apples to apples. We ended up going with the firm who had a food thermal engineer on staff, so it's closely related to what we want to get done. We asked them to create this really rough prototype based on this initial concept that I had, which was heating the tortilla vertically. And the way that we figured that out was by putting a tortilla in between two books just to see if it would stand up. And once we figured that part out, we said, okay, it does stand up. Let's move on to the heaters, right? So it was through this firm that we developed this really rustic prototype with steel gauge wires and these heaters. We put the tortillas inside of it, and we figured out that you can actually put enough electricity through these heaters in order to warm a tortilla. But what comes after that, right? So there's a whole series of steps that you have to figure out, en route to a complete product.
Yeah. So when you're validating your idea, you can research competitors, look at Amazon, Alibaba, identify sort of the white space in the market. You can use, AI tools to figure out total addressable market. Although honestly, that's everybody always says, well, if I only get 1%. So I'm not a huge fan of TAM, but it's nice to see. You can use SurveyMonkey to see what other competitors are selling. You can walk trade shows. I'll just tell you how I feel about this. Okay. So when I'm looking at developing a product, I want to make sure that there is some market. I honestly, it depends what you're going after, but if you're going to fund it yourself, you don't need a $200 million company. You'd probably be really happy with a $10 million company if you own it all, right? And so I'm not worried about a huge TAM. I'm just worried that there is some interest. Your product's a little different because you had to actually create a market, honestly. Okay. But if I'm, just giving some information to the viewers and listeners, I just want some market. And then I want to make sure that it's not completely dominated by Amazon. Okay. So that there's other channels I can sell on. And I want to make sure that it's not exactly already done on Amazon. So I want the product to be unique so that I can patent some protection and not have to go head to head with some Chinese factory selling on Amazon for next to nothing. So that's it's more important for me to have a unique angle that I can protect, that I don't have to go against the competition, even if I have a tiny percentage of that market. And then I want to be able to put that product together with well above average gross margins. Okay. Now everything's different. Appliances aren't going to have as high as other products, but I mean, if you can get, 60% gross margins, you're going to be, in the driver's seat. If you're down in the 30s or low 40s, it's going to be more difficult when it comes to, marketing and having money for those types of activities. Okay. So find some, that's my playbook. Find something super unique. Don't worry about how big the market is, as long as there's some market, and go after that niche area and have good gross margins along the way. And then I think you put yourself in a good spot, especially if you're bootstrapping. You'd be profitable from the beginning. Now, you talked about hiring an engineer. So what are the, now, one thing that you mentioned, Elliot, that was important is your engineer had direct experience, I think, in certain parts of your category, right? The heating part. Okay. So what do you think is like the most important thing if you're hiring, or when you're hiring the engineer, to look for?
So at the bare minimum, you're going to need an electrical engineer and a mechanical engineer to start a product company, right? So the mechanical engineer is going to take care of all the gears and the nuts and the bolts, the metal, whereas the electrical engineer is going to do the microcontroller, the PCB board, and together you're going to have a functioning product, right? The closer to the field your engineer is, the better or the smoother the process is going to be when you go to market, right? So for example, like right now, as we reshore our efforts back to the States, we actually hired the engineers that certify toasters for other companies. We hired them as consultants for our third generation tortilla toaster, right? And the idea is that by using them, you're gonna bypass sort of like the question and answers that happens between engineers who sit outside of the certification process compared to using the engineers that deal with the certification process every day. They're much more familiar with what that process looks like.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the same thing if I hire somebody for a company. Find someone that's already done it. Okay, just makes life a lot easier. Now, Elliot, what do you think about? I know this is a hard question, but as far as like what it's going to cost an engineer. Now, for those who haven't done this, actually, why don't you start with this? What's the output that the engineer is going to give you? Because I mean, if this is new to people, they may not know some of these basic things.
Really, that actually depends on the product that you are developing, right? So, had the tortilla toaster been more complicated than what it is, I don't know that I would have gone after the opportunity, right? But seeing that it's a toaster, I thought to myself, I can probably, I can probably figure this out with the right team. So that's sort of a tough question to answer. But for us, really, going through, prototyping, will get you the answers to these assumptions that you're making in your head and bring them to light, bring them into the real world, right? So, for example, for our toaster, we wanted to figure out how much electricity we can pull from a standard household outlet in order to meet this threshold of toasting 6 tortillas in under a minute. Um, there's another consideration that we had to work through, which was this rotating barrel operation, rotating barrel function that our toaster has that's pretty unique. We had to have someone engineer that for us. Like when you think about it, you think that it's pretty straightforward and easy, but having an engineer look at it and actually engineer it is a whole different story.
Right. But I mean, the output is basically a prototype with the CAD drawings, right? Is that am I oversimplifying it?
So then it's the blueprints, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
each part is going to have a blueprint, right? So this is what one of the blueprints looks like. This
Yep.
is actually for our heaters, right? So as you work along the product development, you'll start ordering parts, right? So this is what the
Mhm.
heaters look like inside of our toaster. Once you
Mhm.
order these, but in order to get to these parts, you have to have blueprints. And
Yep.
in order to have blueprints, you have to have engineers. And in order to have the engineers, you have to have a proof of concept.
Yep. And then what do you think? Now I know this is a wild range here, but what do you think if someone's creating a widget, it actually does plug in, so it uses electricity. The reason I say that is it's a lot cheaper if it's a non-electric, but if you're making something that plugs into the wall, what do you think is the range on what it's going to cost for you to get those final blueprints in CAD?
It's tough. It depends on how complicated your product is.
Yep.
I can only speak on, in this case, tortilla toasters, right? So, you would want to find engineers who are well versed in your category in order to have those questions answered.
Yeah. And I would just say that it's hard to get it done for under 30 grand. This is total ballpark, but sometimes it'll be quoted cheaper, but once you go back and forth, there's revisions, and honestly, it could get over, easily into the hundreds of thousands. But so that it's a huge variance, and not to steer anybody away from it, but there is so that's your initial investment with the engineer. But most engineers, if you have your product idea, um, they can give you a fair quote, and then many engineers I've talked to said that even the majority of their products don't actually go to market, which is sort of sad. Meaning clients go and pay and get this thing uh, conceptually developed, right, with the blueprints and the CAD and everything, but a lot of, or majority, don't even actually then do the next steps and get to market. So let's talk about those next steps. So you got this thing designed, you got your blueprints. Now you're probably thoughtful during the process. Your engineer is helping you, like, oh, okay, you're going to have this rotating piece. You can protect that. You're going to have this piece. You can protect that, and then you take it to your patent attorney. What do you want to share on this step?
Yeah, so we filed a patent back in 2013, and that
Mm-hmm.
patent didn't get granted until 2018. So it was actually a fairly early decision for us to pursue a utility patent. The laws have since changed to first to file. What that means is the first applicant to file for a patent is recognized as the inventor. Prior to this, you can make the argument for being the inventor without necessarily being the first to file. So it's important that you have an application with your name filed with the USPTO before you start talking to suppliers. You don't want there to be any question 5 years from now who owns the idea, who owns the part. And that's just, not only for your own safety, but for, being able to speak freely with suppliers. It's a great benefit to you to talk to a patent attorney and get something filed, like I say, before you disclosing your idea to anyone.
Yep. And the patent attorney can also work hand in hand with your engineer to come up with the ideas, right? So sometimes, you don't know what that leverage point is or what that protection point is, and your engineers will have ideas, and the patent attorney has a lot of experience, and they can kind of work together to come up with some ideas.
It depends. And the reason I say that is because, our product, when we did a patent search, and I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty, but as it turns out, there's over a dozen tortilla toaster patents in the USPTO. So it turns out we weren't the first company to patent a tortilla
That's
toaster.
amazing. I can't believe there's that many. Wow.
Right. So this aha moment that we had was that we were the first to commercialize a tortilla toaster. And what that implies is that during this patent process, I needed to work through different claim sets in order to get to our patent. And that was quite the challenge. Each patent has its own claim set, and each claim set has its own series of disclosure points. There's also other things called prior art that may not be related to your tortilla toaster, but may have something patented inside of them that is related to what you're trying to patent, right? So it's this big process of trying to navigate through these claim sets in order to get a patent. But if you're successful in doing that, you do get several privileges by having a utility patent.
Now, Elliot, I'd like your feedback on this. What I did this time around, I can't even really talk about what I'm making because I haven't patented it all yet, and it's pretty unique. But what I did is I actually went, I reversed this a little bit. I went first to the patent attorney just to see what was out there. And then I did all these steps, right? Then I'm working with the engineer. Well, actually, at first I validated the idea. Then I went to a patent attorney. Then I found out that there's definitely a lot of green space in the category I'm looking at. And then I went to the engineer. But the thing is, the patent attorney, could just identify that, oh yeah, you're good to go in this category. There's definitely other patents filed, but for X, Y, and Z reasons, you're good to go. And then I went to the engineer to develop it because I couldn't do anything. I didn't have a design yet, right? So then I had to go to the engineer. Now I'll go back to the patent attorney, to work on the specifics about what can be protected. Did you do something similar, like ahead of time you're looking before you sort of invested in the long run?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a lot of research on the front end, and just going back to one of your previous points, it costs no money to do your own research. And, it's very low hanging fruit, so you go back on Amazon, Temu, Alibaba, just check out what's in the global marketplace before you drop $1 into the engineering. If you really feel like you're onto something and you want to protect it, then you go to talk to a patent attorney. But I'll say this, Luke, a patent attorney can't do the work entirely for you, right? Because the patent attorney is not the inventor. They're sort of like a consultant, if you will. And they will guide you on, what that patent process looks like. But eventually your application ends up on the examiner's desk. And the examiner is, someone who works for the USPTO. They're going to have a whole bunch of questions related to your invention, specifically centered around the prior art, these patents that exist, previously, and you're going to have to convince them that what you're doing is unique and novel. And your patent attorney will do his or her best at overcoming those objections from the examiner. But the truth is that your attorney can't do that without you, right? Because you're the one that created the idea. You're the one that, is taking this to market. You're the one that's taking all the risks. Their knowledge there's a cap to it, right? They still need those precise answers from you. So, don't think that the patent attorney can take you all the way without your input.
That's a great point. Okay, so let's keep moving along here. So now, we've got the idea. Wow, it seems like we're almost at the finish line, but the truth is we're literally just starting. and so you got this thing paid for. You spent a bunch of money on engineering. You got prototypes. Now you got to make this thing. So let's start with U.S. government and state resources. Okay, what? Just give me a quick summary. Like, what can be found and used, and how valuable is this? Are these resources?
Yeah, they're incredibly valuable. So it appears that manufacturing support is segmented by county and state, right? So what you want to do is you want to look for a local trade manufacturing group in your area. Go over to their website, fill out a contact form. Even better would be to find a number on their website, give them a call, introduce your company as a new member looking to learn more about upcoming events. People would be surprised at how far up the chain of command you can go simply by making yourself vulnerable and asking for help, right? So what we did was landed a meeting with the regional manager for the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center. So we had this call, and pretty quickly during the call, he recognized our need for supplier development. He also outlined the requirements that we would need in order to access the supplier portal. So I spent, close to 10 years in the housewares industry. So on the opposite side of the supply chain when you're selling, right? Now I'm at the beginning of the supply chain, heavily invested into manufacturing. I don't have contacts for suppliers the way I have contacts within the housewares industry. So linking up with IMEC was a breakthrough moment for us, because we were being introduced to suppliers that we just didn't even know existed, right? So going back to the blueprints, once your design's finished and you have your blueprints, those blueprints will then be forwarded to the suppliers. The suppliers will then get the information that they need from those blueprints in order to give you a quotation for your parts.
Right. And also, I know some of this is obvious, but if you're just typically, sourcing out of China or Asia, you might say like, wondering why all this is beneficial. Remember, when you have those blueprints, you can just go to any factory. You can, usually in Asia, you're picking a product that a factory already made. Okay, they own everything, and they're telling you that they're going to sell it to you for this price. Here, you have the leverage. You can take your blueprints. You can go to 3, 4, 5 suppliers. You can cost everything out. You control all of that, and of course, you control any IP with it. So it's mainly, Elliot, I would say for me, it's mainly about control. I could have just taken my idea and said, "Hey, Chinese factory, can you make this?" But then they could have copied it and 50, because my idea is pretty unique, just like your idea, right? And then and then lots of versions can show up online. So you have control, and then so you use your government resources, and now we're talking about supplier outreach. So ThomasNet is good for domestic vendors. Anything else you want to share, kind of on the supplier outreach side?
Thomasnet is a great resource if you want to look for suppliers on your own. If you do have a background in manufacturing and you have blueprints, there's nothing stopping you from looking for suppliers, in your free time, for example, right? But it would, be of a great benefit to you and your company to link up with a manufacturing trade group, because there's other things that they can help you with outside of just sourcing, right? Potential fundings, grants, tax breaks, depending, if you're local and you're dealing with someone in your county. But for us, for example, when we were sourcing a factory overseas, we paid a sourcing agent, $75,000 to go source a factory for us and oversee production. The benefit that we have working with IMEC is that, we now have a domestic sourcing agent that's funded by the state. And now we're creating a web of suppliers that are based in Illinois, to where I can then go and keep an eye and monitor on production, to back to your original point, which is control, right? Because if you want to have control over your production, over the quality, over the durability, whatever, you want to be involved with that. You don't want someone else doing that for you on your behalf.
Exactly. And also, just to clarify again for the rookies out there, which I am one of them, when Elliot's talking about going to suppliers, you're going to have to go to suppliers potentially for each of your components. Okay, right? Not just one
Absolutely.
supplier. Again, it's way more complex. And then Elliot, let's say you've got 5 or 10 components. You got to go to these different suppliers, and is the idea then to have all those, once it's finished, they all come into a contract manufacturer and it's assembled in one spot, right? That's the the terminology and final destination, right?
Right. So it's unlikely that your products are going to be made in a U.S. factory anytime soon. What's more likely is that you'll find suppliers across the nation,
Yep.
each one specializing in its own material, whether it's stamped aluminum or mica heaters or injection molding, and you'll source these individual parts from the suppliers. At which point they will all get shipped over to your contract manufacturer for final assembly and packaging.
Exactly. So we're putting it all together for you. So that now that was step 7. That was shipped to the contract manufacturer. Now, how do you find that contract manufacturer? Is that ThomasNet as well, or what other resources do you have for that?
So it was through an introduction via IMEC.
Uh-huh.
They had gotten background information on what we were trying to accomplish with Nuni Toaster, and they knew of someone. They knew of a company that was outside of Chicago in Naperville, 45 minutes from where I live. That would be potentially a good fit for us. And so I went and I reached out to them. We did this whole email introduction. Then I went to their site, and they were pretty jazzed about what we were doing. They took an interest in our product. They totally understood our initiative to make our stuff in USA, made in USA initiative. And a lot of it has to do with making sure that it's a good fit, because your suppliers should be looking at this as a long run play.
Yep. And okay, and after that, now you're all set. You've done all the work, you've done the engineering, you found the suppliers, you found the contract manufacturer. So now you're good to go as long as you've got money in the bank to now fund this. But you have to kind of get the sales forecast and production capacity in line. So, being realistic, you got to think about your marketing. Now it's the business side. And I think this is, by the way, where a lot of people fall off. For first they get the engineering, then they're looking at what it's going to cost to bring it to life. Okay, that's hard. And then they got to actually sell it. So these are all completely different skills and disciplines that one has to have. What do you want to wrap up with on step 8 here, aligning forecast and production capacity?
Just keep in mind they're two different things. They come from two different departments of a company, right? So you're going to have your sales forecast, and those guys are going to tell you that you're going to sell through 1 million units a year, right? But then you're going to have a production schedule, and if you tell the guys who are actually making them that you want them to make 1 million units in a year, they're sort of going to scoff at you, and you're going to come off as unrealistic. Because when you do the math, it's very challenging, to make 1 million units in a year, right? It's more realistic for you to say, I think we're going to grow. We're going to start at 5,000 units, then 10,000, then 25, then 50,000, and then we're going to peak probably around 100,000 units a year. That seems more sensible to these manufacturing guys, because they're very pragmatic. If you tell them that you're going to, sell through 1 million units in a year, what they're thinking is, how am I possibly going to make 1 million units in 1 year just for you when I have to cater to these other customers? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to blow the opportunity, be coming off as unrealistic, because that's not going to help anyone.
Okay, well, listen, thanks for taking us through these steps. Hopefully making this accessible to someone who's, launching a product or thinking about launching a product. And before I let you go, I want you to kind of, share how people can contact you or find out about Nuni Toaster. But before we go there, what do you think is the most valuable information? There's all these different steps. So what's the most valuable tidbit or information you could share with others who want to manufacture here in the States?
So with prices being higher in domestically than in China, I think it would be in your best interest to get some IP around your product, because it's not the same as a commodity. One of the benefits that we have is a lack of competitors, which allows us to charge a premium for our products. That's going to have direct your cost is going to have a direct impact on what you charge the consumer. So by having this sort of moat around your products, you're going to be able to charge more, when in fact your product is most likely going to cost more making them domestically. So I'll say, definitely want to get some IP on whatever it is that you're doing. Very important.
Yeah. No, I second, third, and fourth and fifth that comment. So get IP, protect yourself, and then just adding on to that. Okay, it depends where you are. I mean, if you're a larger company, you've done this before. I mean, you have your sites set in different numbers. But if you're just starting out, maybe you're doing it for fun, maybe it's you don't have a ton of resources, you don't have to hit super high production numbers. Okay. You need to have good margins. And the best way to have good margins is to have good IP, right? So focus on if you're just, in it for fun or smaller or family business type of thing, focus on margins, focus on IP. Even at lower sales numbers, you're going to be just fine. And so I think that's great advice. So Elliot, where can people learn more about Nuni Toaster and get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you want to just, you can reach out to me at Elliot@NuniToaster.com. That's ELLIOT@NuniToaster.com. I'm really accessible. If you have ideas on how we could potentially scale the company, that's fine. You can reach out to me, and we can talk.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being a guest here. And anybody listening, if you have a business and you're scaling that business and you want to exit it, head over to my website, apexceo.co. I put together an exit readiness test. So you can kind of fill out these different questions and get a rating on how close or realistic it is for you to exit your business. And it'll give you some ideas on what to work on as well. So that's over at apexceo.co. Elliot, appreciate you being a guest today. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Luke.